The doctor's words hung in the air like a dense fog, making it difficult to breathe. Benign, he had said. The tumor was benign. I should have felt relief washing over me, but as I sat alone in the sterile examination room, clutching the paper, gown tightly around my shoulders, all I could think about was how quickly my children had moved to divide what was mine. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 weeks. It had taken them just 3 weeks from my initial diagnosis to secretly meet with lawyers, financial advisors, and each other, carving up the vineyard, the lakehouse, the accounts, and the business I had built with my late husband over 40 years. All while I was undergoing tests, fearing for my life. That betrayal cut deeper than any scalpel ever could. I could still hear my son Daniel's voice, muffled but clear through the cracked office door just yesterday. Mom doesn't need to know yet. The doctors say it could be serious, so we should be prepared. It's better this way. My own son, my firstborn, speaking about me as if I were already gone. My hand trembled slightly as I set down my teacup on the kitchen counter, watching the morning light dance across Lake Evergreen through my kitchen window. This home had always been my sanctuary, a place of laughter and memories. Now it felt like contested territory. I smoothed down the front of my blue cardigan and took a deep breath. The vineyard would be bustling with activity today. The vineyard that, according to paperwork I wasn't supposed to find, would soon belong solely to Daniel. I wasn't dead yet. Not even close. And they were about to learn that Eleanor Martinez still had one final move to make. I've always been a woman who believes in signs. When Michael and I found this piece of land overlooking Lake Evergreen 35 years ago, a single bald eagle soared overhead just as we stepped out of the car. "That's our sign, Ellie," Michael had said, squeezing my hand. "This is where we build our dream." And build we did. Martinez Family Vineyards grew from a wild plot of land into one of the most respected small wineries in the region. Our Cabernet won regional awards 3 years running, and our tasting room became a destination for tourists and locals alike. When Michael passed away 5 years ago, I threw myself into running the business, keeping his dream, our dream, alive. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday in early April. "We've found a mass," Dr. Winters had said, her face carefully neutral. "We need to run more tests, but I want to prepare you. This could be serious." I'd sat there, nodding mechanically, thinking about the spring planting, the new irrigation system we were installing in the East Field, and how I needed to call Daniel about the upcoming distributor meeting. I didn't tell my children immediately. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I needed time to process it myself. By Friday, though, I invited them all for Sunday dinner. Daniel and his wife Grace, my daughter Sophia and her husband Jacob, and my younger son Thomas. Over my homemade paella, I told them about the mass, the pending tests, and Dr. Winters' concerns. "Mom, you should have told us right away," Daniel said, his hand covering mine across the dining table, concern etching lines around his eyes. At 52, his dark hair was silver at the temples, just like his father's had been. "We need to help you manage things," Sophia added, already pulling out her phone, no doubt to make notes. Always the organizer, my Sophia. Only Thomas remained quiet, watching me with eyes so like his father's. "What do you need, Mom?" he asked simply. "Not what we think you need. What do you need?" I squeezed his hand gratefully. "Just your support, while we figure this out." They all nodded, made the appropriate sympathetic noises, offered to drive me to appointments, bring meals. A perfect performance of concerned children. Had I known then what they were planning, I might have laughed. At the irony of it all. The next 2 weeks were a blur of doctor's appointments, blood tests, and scans. Dr. Winters wanted to be thorough, which I appreciated. What I didn't appreciate was how my children suddenly found reasons to be at the vineyard constantly. Daniel, who normally visited once a week to discuss business, was there daily, looking through files in the office, taking meetings with our staff. "Just lightening your load, Mom," he'd say with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Sophia started showing up with meal prep containers, insisting on organizing my medication, my calendar, my life. She even attempted to reschedule a meeting I had with our accountant, saying I needed to focus on my health. I sat in the same chair where this had all begun, hands folded calmly in my lap, heart hammering against my ribs. "The mass is benign, Eleanor," she said with a smile. "We'll need to remove it, but this isn't cancer. With proper treatment and some lifestyle adjustments, there's no reason you won't have many healthy years ahead of you." The relief should have been overwhelming, but it was tempered by the knowledge of what my children had tried to do. Still, I thanked Dr. Winters, scheduled the follow-up appointments, and drove home, my mind clear for the first time in weeks. That Sunday, I once again invited my children for dinner. I prepared all their favorites: slow-roasted lamb with rosemary, from my garden, scalloped potatoes the way Michael used to make them, fresh bread, and a bottle of our best vintage. As they gathered around my dining table, the sun setting over the lake behind them, I served the meal with a smile. "You're looking well, Mom," Sophia said, studying my face. "The new medication must be helping." I nodded, taking my seat at the head of the table. "I've had some news, actually. That's why I wanted us all together tonight." The air in the room changed immediately. Daniel set down his fork, and Grace reached for his hand. Sophia straightened in her chair, while Jacob studied his wine glass intently. Only Thomas looked directly at me, his eyes clear and steady. "I saw Dr. Winters last week," I began, taking a sip of water. "The mass is benign." There was a moment of silence, then an explosion of exclamations, relief, questions. They performed their parts perfectly, the concerned, now relieved children. If I hadn't seen the documents with my own eyes, I might have believed them. "That's wonderful news, Mom," Daniel said, raising his glass in a toast. "To your health." "Yes," I agreed, raising my own glass. "To health. And honesty." Something in my tone must have alerted them. The smiles around the table faltered slightly. "What do you mean, Mom?" Sophia asked, her voice carefully light. I set down my glass and looked at each of them in turn. "I know what you've been doing. The trust documents, the power of attorney, forms, the restructuring of the vineyard management." The color drained from Daniel's face. Sophia's eyes widened in panic. Jacob and Grace suddenly found their plates fascinating. Thomas simply closed his eyes briefly, a pained expression crossing his face. "Mom, we can explain," Daniel started, his voice taking on the pacifying tone he used with difficult clients. "We were just trying to protect you, to make sure everything was taken care of if I became incapacitated," I finished for him, "or if I died, because those documents weren't about protection, Daniel. They were about control." Sophia jumped in, always quick to manage a crisis. "You're misunderstanding, Mom. We were worried about you. The initial diagnosis was scary, and we wanted to make sure everything you and Dad built was preserved." "Preserved for whom?" I asked quietly. "Because, from what I saw, you were dividing assets I'm very much still using, cutting out your brother, and positioning yourselves to take over long before there was any medical reason to do so." The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas looked between his siblings, confusion and dawning understanding playing across his face. "You didn't tell me about any documents," he said to Daniel. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Only Thomas seemed normal, stopping by in the evenings to simply sit with me on the porch, watching the sunset over the lake, talking about everything and nothing. I might have continued to believe their concern was genuine if not for Marcus Freeman. Marcus had been our family attorney for decades, handling everything from the vineyard's incorporation to Michael's will. He called me on a Wednesday afternoon, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Ellie, I'm calling because I'm concerned. Daniel contacted me about setting up a trust for your assets, given your health situation. But he's suggesting terms that seem premature and, frankly, not in line with what I know of your wishes." My hand tightened around the phone. "What kind of terms, Marcus?" His sigh crackled through the line. "Immediate transfer of operational control of the vineyard, to him with Sophia as financial controller, accelerated inheritance distributions, power of attorney for both of them, effective immediately rather than upon incapacitation." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "And they told you I approved this?" "They implied you were too overwhelmed to handle the details but had agreed to the general framework." I thanked Marcus, my mind already racing. After hanging up, I sat motionless at my kitchen table, watching hummingbirds battle over the feeder outside my window. They were so tiny, yet so fiercely territorial. Perhaps I needed to take a lesson from them. The next day, I drove into town to meet Marcus properly. He spread out the documents my children had drafted for his review, papers that would have effectively stripped me of control over everything I'd built, everything Michael and I had created together. "They're moving quickly because they're worried about your capacity to make decisions if your condition worsens," Marcus explained, though his tone made it clear he found their haste distasteful. "I see," I said quietly, examining the papers. Daniel had arranged for himself to take over as CEO of the vineyard, with a significant salary increase. Sophia would control all financial decisions and accounts. The lakehouse, my home, would be transferred into a trust they would manage for my benefit. "What about Thomas?" I asked. Marcus frowned. "That's another concern. These documents provide significantly smaller distributions to Thomas." When I questioned this, Daniel said it was because Thomas hasn't been involved in the family business. That much was true. Thomas had chosen to become a teacher rather than join the vineyard. But he'd never asked for anything in return, never expected compensation for a path he hadn't chosen to take. "And what happens if this mass turns out to be benign?" I asked, a hypothesis forming in my mind. Marcus looked uncomfortable. "These transfers would be difficult to reverse once executed." I nodded slowly, understanding completely. My children weren't preparing for my incapacitation, they were orchestrating my removal. The disappointment was a physical ache in my chest, sharper than any pain the mass had caused me. "I need you to do something for me, Marcus," I said finally. "But no one can know. Not my children, not your staff, no one." He leaned forward, concern and curiosity mingling in his expression. "Whatever you need, Ellie." Over the next week, I played along with my children's charade. I allowed Daniel to help with vineyard decisions, permitted Sophia to rearrange my medication and schedule my life. I watched as they exchanged glances when they thought I wasn't looking, as they took calls outside where I couldn't hear them. All the while, I was working with Marcus, putting my own plan into motion. The following Tuesday, I returned to Dr. Winter's office for my results. Daniel shot him an irritated glance. "You're not involved in the business. It wasn't relevant to you." "Not relevant?" Thomas's voice rose slightly. "We're talking about our mother's life, her home, everything she and Dad built. How is that not relevant to me?" I let them argue for a moment, watching as decades of family dynamics played out before me. Daniel, always the entitled eldest, Sophia, the strategic mediator, Thomas, often overlooked but with the clearest moral compass of the three. "That's enough," I finally said, my voice cutting through their bickering. They fell silent immediately, a testament to the authority I'd apparently maintained despite their best efforts. "I didn't invite you here to argue. I invited you because I have an announcement to make." I reached beside me for the folder Marcus had prepared, placing it on the table. 2 weeks ago, when Marcus informed me of your activities, I made some decisions of my own. Daniel paled further. What kind of decisions, Mom? I opened the folder and withdrew the documents. Effective immediately, I have restructured the ownership of Martinez Family Vineyards. 40% remains with me. 20% has been transferred to Thomas. What? Sophia gasped. But Thomas has never shown any interest in the vineyard. Perhaps because he was never given the opportunity, I replied calmly. The remaining 40% has been placed in a trust to benefit the children of vineyard employees seeking higher education, a scholarship fund in your father's name. Daniel's face flushed with anger. You can't do that. Dad always intended for the vineyard to stay in the family. Your father intended for the vineyard to be managed by people who cared about it and the people who make it successful, I corrected him. And this is still my business to run as I see fit. And the house? Sophia asked, her voice tight. The lakehouse remains mine, of course, I said, since I am very much alive and, as Dr. Winters confirmed, likely to remain so for many years. However, I've updated my will. When the time comes, the actual time, not the convenient time you tried to arrange, this house will be donated to the community to serve as an art center and public garden. The silence around the table was absolute, even the usual evening. Sounds of the lake seemed muted, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Why? Daniel finally asked, his voice rough with emotion, though whether it was hurt or thwarted greed, I couldn't be sure. I looked at my firstborn, remembering the day he was placed in my arms, tiny and perfect and full of possibility, because you showed me that you value what your father and I built more than you value me. That's not fair, Sophia protested, tears in her eyes. We were trying to protect your legacy. My legacy? I echoed. I'm still writing my legacy. Sophia. And now it will include protecting what Michael and I built from the very people we built it for. Thomas reached across the table, taking my hand. I'm sorry, Mom. I had no idea what they were planning. I squeezed his fingers gently. I know, sweetheart. So that's it, Daniel demanded, anger now clearly winning over any other emotion. You're punishing us because we tried to be prepared? I met his gaze steadily. I'm not punishing you, Daniel. I'm protecting myself, the business, and the community we've been part of for decades. You'll still inherit some assets, as outlined in the updated will, but the vineyard and this house will serve a purpose beyond enriching people who tried to take them before their time. Grace, who had been silent throughout, finally spoke. I told you this was wrong, Daniel. I told you to wait. He shot her a warning look, but the damage was done. So they had discussed it, debated the ethics of it, and still proceeded. I think it's time for you all to leave, I said quietly. I'm feeling quite tired after all this honesty. They filed out in stunned silence, Sophia attempting to hug me at the door. I allowed it, but felt nothing of the warmth that had always existed between us. Thomas lingered behind. Do you want me to stay? He asked. I shook my head. Not tonight. I need some time alone, but we'll talk soon about the vineyard. I meant what I said. You have a place there if you want it. After they'd all gone, I poured myself another glass of wine and walked out onto the porch, settling into the swing Michael had built when we first moved in. The lake was silver in the moonlight, the vineyard a dark, undulating shadow on the hillside beyond. For the first time since finding the documents, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of my children's betrayal. The tears came then, hot and bitter. Not for the loss of what might have been taken from me, but for the loss of what I'd thought I had. Children who valued me beyond what I could give them. As I wiped away the tears, a strange sense of lightness began to replace the grief. I had stopped them. More than that, I had reclaimed my power, my business, my home. And in doing so, I had ensured that the true legacy Michael and I had built, one of community, support, and integrity, would continue long after I was gone. The vineyard would thrive. The house would become a place of creativity and beauty for all to enjoy. And my children would have to live with the knowledge that their greed had cost them not just their inheritance, but something far more valuable: my trust. I raised my glass to the night sky, to Michael's memory, to my own resilience. To the final move, I whispered. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled, a real smile, full of determination and the quiet satisfaction of justice served. Morning. Arrived with golden light streaming through my bedroom curtains. I had slept surprisingly well considering the emotional confrontation of the previous evening. As I made my morning coffee, I gazed out at the vineyard stretching across the hillside. The rows of vines perfectly aligned like the musical notes of a symphony Michael and I had composed together over decades. The vineyard had always been our sanctuary, our legacy, our life's work. Now it represented something else, my independence reclaimed. My phone had been buzzing since dawn, 14 missed calls, 6 from Daniel, 5 from Sophia, 3 from Thomas. Dozens of text messages, each more urgent than the last. I set the phone face down on the kitchen counter and sipped my coffee. They could wait. For 35 years, I had been available to my children at a moment's notice. Today, I would take time for myself. I dressed carefully in slacks and a light cashmere sweater, applied my makeup with precision, and drove myself to the vineyard office. Maria, our office manager for the past 15 years, looked up in surprise when I walked through the door. "Eleanor, we weren't expecting you today. Daniel said you'd be taking time off for health reasons." I smiled warmly at her. "My health is just fine, Maria. And I'll be coming in regularly, as usual." The relief on her face was immediate. "Oh, thank goodness. Things haven't been the same with Daniel trying to run everything. He doesn't understand the harvest schedules, and he's been talking about cutting the healthcare benefits for the seasonal workers." That stung like a physical blow. Michael had always insisted on providing healthcare for everyone who worked at the vineyard, even seasonal help. It was one of the reasons our staff loyalty was so strong, with families working for us across generations. "No benefits will be cut," I assured her firmly. "In fact, I'll be making some announcements about the vineyard's future soon that I think everyone will appreciate." I spent the morning in my office, reviewing the changes Daniel had attempted to implement in just 3 short weeks. Cost-cutting measures that would have compromised the quality of our wine. A new marketing direction that abandoned our commitment to sustainability for flashier, less authentic messaging. A proposed sale of our smallest field, the original. Plot Michael and I had started with, to a neighboring development company. With each discovery, my resolve strengthened. My children hadn't just been preparing to take over. They had been preparing to dismantle everything that made Martinez Family Vineyards special, everything that had earned us respect in the industry and loyalty from our customers. At noon, I called an impromptu staff meeting in the main tasting room. Nearly 40 employees gathered, from Maria and our head winemaker Javier to the field workers who had just come in for lunch. Many looked nervous, no doubt having heard rumors about changes and cuts. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," I began, standing before them with the vineyard visible through the windows behind me. "I know there have been some confusing messages lately, with my son Daniel making decisions and announcements." I paused, watching their faces. These people weren't just employees. They were extended family. The Garcia brothers had been with us since planting our second field. Lucia in accounting had watched my children grow up alongside her own. Javier had learned winemaking alongside Michael, the 2 men spending countless hours debating the perfect blend. I want to be clear. Martinez Family Vineyards remains under my leadership. My health scare, thankfully, has resolved positively. I am here, I am well, and I am still very much in charge. The relief in the room was palpable. Shoulders relaxed, smiles emerged. Furthermore, I want to share some news about the future of this vineyard. As many of you know, my late husband Michael and I always believed that this land, these vines, and the wines we produce are about more than profit. They're about community, sustainability, and creating something meaningful that outlasts us. I took a deep breath, knowing that once I spoke the next words aloud to this group, there would be no turning back. My children would hear about it within hours. I've established a new ownership structure for the vineyard. 40% remains with me. 20% now belongs to my son Thomas, who many of you know as the high school teacher who helps with harvest every fall. Surprised. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Thomas was well-liked, but had never been involved in the business side of the vineyard. The remaining 40%, I continued, my voice steady, has been placed in a trust that will eventually provide educational scholarships for the children and grandchildren of vineyard employees, past and present. This trust will be named after Michael, honoring his commitment to education and community. The room fell silent for a moment, then erupted into applause and exclamations. Lucia wiped tears from her eyes. Javier stepped forward, taking my hand in both of his. "Eleanor," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Michael would be so proud." I squeezed his weathered hand. "I hope so." After the meeting, I walked the rows of vines with Javier, discussing the coming harvest and the new Merlot blend he was experimenting with. The familiar routine was comforting, grounding. The vineyard had always been my therapy, the place where problems seemed smaller and solutions clearer. Daniel was pushing for higher yields, Javier told me as we examined a cluster of developing grapes. I tried to explain that it would compromise quality, but he said markets were changing, and we needed to focus on volume. I shook my head. Quality remains our priority, Javier. Always. By mid-afternoon, the inevitable happened. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "At the vineyard office. We need to talk, now." I took my time finishing my tour with Javier, stopping to chat with the pruning crew, and checking on the new irrigation system being installed. Only then did I make my way back to the main building. Daniel was pacing in my office, his face flushed with anger. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded as soon as I closed the door. I settled calmly into my chair, motioning for him to sit. He remained standing, his body radiating tension. "I'm running my business, Daniel. The business your father and I built. You announced major ownership changes without consulting me, without consulting the family. You gave Thomas 20% when he's never put in a day's work here, and you're giving away nearly half the company to what? Strangers' children?" I studied my son, trying to see past the angry man to the boy I had raised. Had the seeds of this entitlement always been there? Or had I somehow cultivated them without realizing? Not strangers, Daniel. The children of the people who have helped build this vineyard alongside our family. And yes, I made these decisions without consulting you, just as you made decisions about my assets without consulting me. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father's that it made my heart ache despite everything. That was different. We thought you were seriously ill. We were trying to protect the business. Were you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you were trying to seize control and reshape the vineyard into something your father and I never intended it to be. Daniel's jaw clenched. You have no idea what it takes to stay competitive in today's market. Dad's old-fashioned methods built a respected, profitable business that has supported this family and dozens of others for decades, I finished firmly. Your father wasn't just a sentimentalist, Daniel. He was a shrewd businessman. who understood that true success comes from integrity, quality, and community support, not just quarterly profits. He sank into the chair across from me, the anger in his expression giving way to calculation. I recognized that look. It was the same one he wore when negotiating with distributors. "Mom, be reasonable," he said, his tone softening. "We can work something out. Maybe the trust is a good idea, but a smaller percentage." "And why Thomas?" "He's never shown any interest in the business." "Perhaps because you and Sophia never made room for him," I suggested. "Just as you tried to push me aside." He flinched, slightly at that. "We weren't pushing you aside. We were preparing for what seemed like the worst. By cutting employee benefits? By selling the original field? By changing everything your father and I built?" His silence was answer enough. I leaned forward. "Daniel, I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing it to protect what matters. The vineyard's integrity, the community we've built, and yes, my own autonomy." "So what am I supposed to do now?" he asked, and for a moment I glimpsed vulnerability beneath the anger. "You've built my whole career around eventually taking over. You're still the sales director, a position you've earned through hard work and talent," I reminded him. "That hasn't changed. What's changed is the assumption that you'll inherit control of everything." He stood abruptly. "Sophia's going?" "To be furious." "I imagine she already is," I replied calmly. "She's probably heard from half the staff by now." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with Sophia's name on the screen. I declined the call. Daniel moved toward the door, then paused. "Is this really what Dad would have wanted?" It was a low blow, using Michael's memory against me. But I had spent 35 years married to the man, building dreams together, sharing whispered conversations late into the night about our hopes for the vineyard's future. Your father believed in fairness, community, and protecting what we built. So yes, Daniel, this is exactly what he would have wanted. After Daniel left, I sat quietly in my office, feeling the weight of the day's confrontations. Outside, the afternoon sun gilded the vineyard, turning the leaves to gold. In the distance, I could see workers moving between the rows, tending the vines that would produce this year's vintage, life continuing as it always did. My phone rang again. Thomas this time. Unlike his siblings, I answered. "Mom? Are you okay? I've been trying to reach you all day." "I'm fine, Thomas. I'm at the vineyard." He exhaled audibly. "I just got off the phone with Daniel. He's not happy." "I imagine not." A brief silence, then. "Did you really give me 20%? Of the vineyard?" "I did." "Mom, I don't know anything about running a winery. I'm a high school literature teacher." I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "You don't need to quit your job, Thomas. But you've always loved this place, even if you chose a different path. You understand what it means, to the family, to the community. I trust you to honor that." Another pause. "Daniel says you've set up a scholarship trust with the rest of the shares." It seemed fitting. Your father always said education was the best investment. Thomas's quiet laughter warmed me. He did say that, usually when writing the checks for our college tuition. His tone grew serious again. "Are you sure about all this, Mom? It's a lot of change all at once." "I'm sure," I told him. "Sometimes, the right decision becomes perfectly clear when someone tries to take your choices away from you." After we hung up, I gathered my things to head home. As I stepped out of the office, I found Maria waiting for me. "Eleanor," she said hesitantly, "everyone's talking about the announcement. The scholarship trust. Is it really true?" I nodded. Her eyes filled with tears. "My Alicia. She's dreaming of medical school. She's so smart, but we've been worried about the cost." Alicia was Maria's granddaughter, a bright young woman who often helped in the office during summer breaks. I took Maria's hand. The trust will take a few years to be fully funded, but yes, it will help students like Alicia pursue their dreams. Maria embraced me suddenly. Thank you. Michael would be so proud. For the second time that day, someone had invoked my late husband's approval, but this time it didn't feel manipulative. It felt true. Michael had always believed in investing in people, in community, in the future. The drive home along the winding lake road felt different somehow. The familiar landscape, the blue expanse of Lake Evergreen to my left, the rolling hills to my right, seemed more vivid, as if a veil had been lifted from my eyes. For weeks, I had been seeing my world through the lens of illness and betrayal. Now I was seeing it through the lens of reclaimed power and purpose. My phone had continued to buzz throughout the drive. Sophia, Daniel, even Jacob and Grace trying to reach me. I let their calls go to voicemail. Tonight was for me. As I turned into my driveway, I was surprised to see a car already parked there. Thomas's modest sedan. He was sitting on the porch steps, waiting. "I thought you might want company," he said simply as I approached. I sat beside him, both of us looking out over the lake. The setting sun had painted the water copper and gold, a perfect mirror to the vineyard on the hillside behind us. "Daniel called me 6 times, Thomas said finally. "Sophia, too. They want to have a family meeting, try to talk you out of the changes." I nodded, unsurprised. "And what do you think?" He considered for a long moment. I think Dad would approve." He turned to look at me. "I found out what they were doing, you know. Not all the details, but enough. Sophia let something slip last week about power of attorney, and it didn't sit right. Why didn't you say anything?" He shrugged. "I was trying to figure out how to approach you. I was worried about stressing you when you were already dealing with health concerns." I squeezed his hand. "You're the only one who asked what I needed, that first night when I told you all about the diagnosis. Do you remember?" He nodded. "I remember. You've always been like that, seeing people not just what they can do for you." I smiled at him. "Maybe that's why you became a teacher instead of a businessman." We sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and lights began to twinkle around the lake. Houses coming alive with evening activities. Boats returning to shore with navigation lights glowing. "Will you help me?" I asked finally. "With the vineyard, with the trust? I could use someone I trust completely." "Of course," Thomas said without hesitation. "Whatever you need." Later, after Thomas had gone home and I was alone in the lakehouse, I allowed myself a moment of pure grief, not for my health, which was recovering, but for the relationship with my children that would never be the same. Daniel and Sophia had shown me who they truly were in a moment of crisis. That knowledge couldn't be unlearned. As I prepared for bed, I caught sight of Michael's photograph on my nightstand. Not a formal portrait, but a candid shot from harvest about 10 years ago. He was laughing, surrounded by workers, sleeves rolled up and hands stained purple from grapes. His eyes crinkled at the corners the way they always did when he was truly happy. "I did the right thing," I told his image softly. "I protected what we built." I could almost hear his response. "Of course you did, Ellie. You always were the backbone of this family." Sleep came easier than I expected, deep and dreamless. When I woke the next morning, I felt lighter somehow, as if I'd set down a burden I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. The burden of expectations, of attempting to see my children as I wished them to be rather than as they were. My phone showed 27 missed calls overnight. I scrolled through them, Daniel, Sophia, their spouses, even a few from unfamiliar, numbers that I suspected were attorneys or financial advisors they had enlisted. I set the phone aside without returning any calls. Today would be another day for me, for the vineyard, for building the future I wanted rather than defending against the one they had tried to create. I dressed for the day, made my coffee, and stepped out onto my porch to watch the morning mist rising off Lake Evergreen. A pair of eagles soared overhead, perhaps descendants of the one Michael and I had seen that first day. Another sign. The vineyard awaited. There was work to be done, a harvest to prepare for, a future to secure. My children would need to adapt to the new reality or continue fighting against it. That was their choice now. I had made mine. As I drove toward the vineyard office, I felt a sense of purpose stronger than anything I'd experienced since Michael's death. The betrayal had been painful, yes, but it had also been clarifying. Like pruning away diseased vines to save the healthy ones, I had cut away the illusions about my family and my place in it. What remained was stronger, truer, and ready to flourish. The vineyard came into view as I crested the hill, the morning, sun illuminating rows of vines stretching toward the horizon. 35 years of love, labor, and dedication. Not a legacy to be carved up by those who didn't understand its true value, but a living testament to what Michael and I had believed in, that success was measured not just in profit, but in lives touched, community built, and values upheld. I pulled into my parking space, noting that Daniel's car was already there, no doubt preparing for another confrontation. Sophia's would likely arrive soon. The battle for the vineyard's future, and my own, was far from over. But for the first time since finding those documents, I felt completely certain of my path forward. They had made their move, assuming weakness and compliance on my part. But they had underestimated me. The woman who had helped break rocky soil for the first vines, who had weathered frosts and droughts and market downturns, who had continued standing after losing the love of her life. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, straightened my shoulders, and stepped out into the morning sunshine. Let them come. I was ready. Inside the office, the atmosphere was tense. Staff members moved quietly, exchanging glances as I walked through the reception area. Maria gave me a supportive nod, her loyalty clear. I could hear voices from the conference room, Daniel's rising in frustration, another responding more calmly. I paused outside the door, listening. "You don't understand what she's done," Daniel was saying. "She's essentially giving away half the company to people who have no stake in its success." "I think you're the one who doesn't understand," came Thomas's steady reply. "These people have every stake in the vineyard's success. They've put their lives into it, just like Mom and Dad did." I smiled to myself. Thomas had arrived early, standing his ground against his older brother, the quiet middle child, finding his voice at last. I pushed open the door. Daniel and Thomas turned toward me, both looking startled by my appearance. Thomas recovered first, offering a small smile of greeting. Daniel's expression hardened. "Good morning," I said, setting my purse down and taking my usual seat at the head of the conference table. "I see we're having a family discussion." "Mom," Daniel began immediately, "you have to reconsider these changes. They're reckless and emotional decisions made during a stressful time." I met his gaze steadily. "They're carefully considered decisions made after discovering my own children were plotting behind my back to seize control of my assets." He flinched. "That's not fair, isn't it? Tell me, Daniel, if my health news had been worse, if the mass had been malignant, would you have even waited for me to die before implementing your plans? Or would you have used my illness as justification to push me aside while I was still fighting for my life?" The question hung in the air between us. Thomas looked down at his hands, uncomfortable but present. Daniel's jaw worked as he struggled to find a response that wouldn't incriminate him further. "We thought we were doing what was best for the company," he finally said. "The company," I repeated. "Not for me." "That distinction matters, Daniel." Before he could respond, the door opened again. Sophia stood there, impeccably dressed as always, her expression a careful mask of concern. "Mom," she said, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. "We've been trying to reach you." "I've been busy," I replied simply. "Running the business you and your brother were so eager to take over." She took a seat beside Daniel, the two of them unconsciously forming a united front across the table. Thomas remained to my right, quiet but supportive. "Mom, we need to discuss these dramatic changes you've made," Sophia began, her tone reasonable and measured, the same tone she used when trying to talk her clients through difficult decisions. "Making major financial and structural changes during a health crisis isn't advised. Any financial planner would tell you that." "I'm not having a health crisis," I reminded her. "The mass is benign. I'm going to be fine." "But you didn't know that when you made these decisions," she pressed, "you were reacting emotionally to finding out about our contingency planning." I had to admire her phrasing. Contingency planning sounded so much better than asset seizure. "Let's be very clear," I said, looking between my two eldest children. "Your actions went far beyond contingency planning. You were restructuring the business, planning to cut employee benefits, sell portions of our land, and completely change the vineyard's direction, all while excluding your brother and assuming I would be too ill to object." "Thomas has never shown interest in running the business," Daniel interjected. "Perhaps because you two never gave him the chance," I countered. "You've always seen the vineyard as your inheritance, not as the family legacy your father and I intended it to be." Sophia leaned forward, switching tactics. "Mom, we love you. We were worried about you. Maybe we went too far, but it came from a place of concern." "Did it? Then explain why the documents gave you too complete control rather than creating a board that included all family members. Explain why Thomas's inheritance was significantly smaller. Explain why you were already implementing changes before we even had a diagnosis." Their silence was telling. "I thought so," I said quietly. "This wasn't about protecting me or even the business. This was about taking what you've always felt entitled to." "That's not fair," Daniel repeated, but with less conviction. "What's not fair," Thomas spoke up, his voice firm, "is how you two have treated Mom. She built this place with Dad. It's hers to decide what happens to it." Daniel turned on him. "Easy for you to say now that you've got 20% handed to you on a silver platter." Thomas didn't rise to the bait. "I never asked for any percentage. I never expected it. Unlike you, I didn't feel entitled to anything." "Enough," I said, holding up a hand to stop the brewing argument. "The decisions have been made. The legal documents are signed. The trust is established. This is the new reality of Martinez family vineyards." "We could contest it," Sophia said, her voice taking on an edge I rarely heard from her. "Given the timing and your health concerns, we could make a case that you weren't in a proper state of mind." I smiled at her, which seemed to unnerve her more than anger would have. "You could try. But consider what that would mean. Publicly battling your mother over control of the family business, arguing that I'm mentally incompetent while I'm clearly running the vineyard successfully. How would that look to our clients, our distributors, the community?" Her expression faltered. Image had always mattered greatly to Sophia. "Furthermore," I continued, "Marcus has extensive documentation of your attempts to seize control while I was undergoing medical testing. How would that look in court? Two children trying to wrest control from their potentially ill mother." Daniel and Sophia exchanged glances, the reality of their position sinking in. "So what now?" Daniel finally asked. "What role do we even have here anymore?" "That," I told him, "is entirely up to you. You're both still shareholders. Daniel, you're still sales director. Sophia, you still manage our legal compliance. Those roles haven't changed. What's changed is the assumption that you'll eventually control everything." I stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. "You have a choice to make. You can accept the new structure and continue contributing your considerable talents to the vineyard's success. Or you can fight me and damage not only our family relationships, but potentially the business itself. I gathered my things and moved toward the door. I'll leave you to discuss your options. I have a vineyard to run. As I walked out, I heard Thomas's chair scrape back as he stood to follow me. Neither Daniel nor Sophia called after us. In the hallway, Thomas fell into step beside me. That was intense. It was necessary, I replied. They needed to understand that this isn't a negotiation. We walked through the main building and out onto the terrace that overlooked the vineyard. Workers were moving through the rows, checking irrigation lines and inspecting the developing fruit. The morning sun had burned away the mist, revealing a clear blue sky above the green landscape. "Do you think they'll accept it?" Thomas asked, leaning against the terrace railing. I considered the question, watching the steady, purposeful movement of the workers tending the vines. Eventually, they're angry and disappointed now, but they're also practical. Fighting me would be costly, financially and otherwise. And if they don't accept it? I turned to look at my middle child, who had always been the peacemaker, the one who hated family conflict. Then the vineyard will continue without them. It survived frost and drought and pests. It will survive this too. He nodded slowly, understanding that my resolve wasn't just about the business, but about something deeper. Self-respect, autonomy, the right to control my own legacy. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said simply. I squeezed his hand, grateful for his presence, for having at least one child who saw me as a person rather than a means to an end. Together, we looked out over the vineyard, both of us understanding that, whatever happened next, things had fundamentally changed. The decisions I'd made couldn't be unmade. The truths revealed couldn't be unknown. And yet, like the vines stretching toward the sun below us, there was still potential for growth, for new beginnings. Different, perhaps, than what any of us had expected, but no less vital for that difference. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the vineyard as I walked the eastern slope with Javier. The Cabernet vines here had always been my favorite, the first variety Michael and I had planted, chosen after months of soil testing and climate research. They were strong now, mature, their roots reaching deep into the hillside. Like me, they had weathered storms and droughts and still produced something wonderful. "The sugar levels are perfect," Javier said, plucking a grape and crushing it between his fingers. 2 more weeks, I think. Maybe 3 if the weather stays cool. I nodded, tasting a grape myself. Sweet, with just the right balance of acid. "Promising. Let's start planning the harvest schedule then. I want to make sure we have all the seasonal workers lined up." Daniel already cut the harvest budget by 15%, Javier said carefully, watching my reaction. He said we could make do with fewer workers this year. I sighed, adding, "Another item to the mental list of decisions I would need to reverse. Restore the original budget. Quality comes first, always." Javier smiled, relief evident in his weathered face. "That's what I told him. He didn't listen." "Well, he'll have to listen now," I replied, gazing down the neat rows that stretched toward the lake. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I glanced at the screen, an unknown number with our local area code. Given the past week's events, I was wary of answering calls I didn't recognize, but something prompted me to accept this one. Eleanor Martinez speaking. "Mrs. Martinez, this is Lawrence Briggs from Lakeside Community Bank." The voice was polite but formal. "I'm calling because there seems to be some confusion regarding the vineyard's accounts." My grip tightened on the phone. "What kind of confusion, Mr. Briggs?" "We've received conflicting instructions. Your son Daniel submitted paperwork to be added as a primary signatory on all business accounts, effective immediately. But our records indicate you're the sole authorized signatory." A chill ran through me despite the warm afternoon. When did he submit this paperwork? Yesterday afternoon, ma'am. After our confrontation. After I had made it clear the vineyard would remain under my control. He had gone directly to the bank to try another approach. Mr. Briggs, my son has no authority to make such changes. I am the owner and CEO of Martinez Family Vineyards, and I have not authorized any modifications to the account access. I understand, Mrs. Martinez. That's why I'm calling to verify. Would you be able to come to the bank in person to sort this out? Perhaps tomorrow morning? I'll be there at 9, I said firmly. After ending the call, I stood motionless among the vines, processing this latest betrayal. Daniel hadn't accepted the new reality. He was still fighting, still trying to wrest control from me through any means possible. Eleanor? Javier's concerned voice broke through my thoughts. Is everything all right? I turned to him, this man who had worked alongside my husband for decades, who knew the soil and vines as intimately as we did. Daniel tried to add himself to the vineyard's bank accounts without my knowledge. Javier's expression darkened. After everything, he's still trying to take over? It seems so. He shook his head slowly. Michael would be so disappointed. The simple truth of those words struck me deeply. Michael had loved all our children, had been proud of their successes, but he had also valued integrity above all else. What would he think of Daniel's actions now? Of Sophia's complicity? Yes, I said quietly. He would. I left the vineyard, earlier than usual, driving not home but to Thomas's small house on the other side of Lake Evergreen. Unlike his siblings, who had chosen large homes in exclusive neighborhoods, Thomas lived modestly in a craftsman bungalow he had lovingly restored, surrounded by gardens and towering oak trees. He answered the door in jeans and a faded t-shirt, clearly surprised to see me. Mom, is everything okay? Not exactly, I admitted as he ushered me inside. I need your help with something. Thomas's home reflected his personality. Warm, unpretentious, filled with books and comfortable furniture. Photos of his students, theater productions lined one wall, his pride in their accomplishments evident in the careful framing. Over cups of tea at his kitchen table, I explained the situation with the bank accounts. I don't understand, Thomas said, shaking his head, in disbelief. After everything that's happened, after you made your position clear, he's still trying to take control? It seems Daniel can't accept that the vineyard isn't his birthright, I replied, and I'm concerned about what else he might try. Thomas looked troubled. What can I do? I need a second signatory on the accounts, someone I trust completely. I'd like it to be you. He hesitated. Are you sure? I don't know anything about business banking. You don't need to. This is about protection, not financial management. If something happens to me, if I actually do become ill, or if Daniel tries something else, I need to know there's someone looking out for the vineyard's interests. For my interests. Thomas nodded slowly. Of course, whatever you need. Thank you. I reached across the table to squeeze his hand. There's something else. Given recent events, I think it's time I updated my medical directives as well. I'd like to name you as my medical power of attorney. Not Sophia? He asked, surprised. Sophia had always been the one we all turned to in a crisis, the organized one, the planner. Not anymore, I said simply. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Because of what they tried to do. Because they saw my illness as an opportunity rather than a crisis. Because they were already planning my exit before we even knew if I would recover. Thomas was quiet for a moment, absorbing the weight of this responsibility. I'll do it, he finally said, but let's hope it never comes to that. We spent the next hour discussing practical matters, what documents needed to be updated, who should be contacted, what steps should be taken to protect the vineyard and my personal assets from further attempts at control. It was a conversation I had never expected to have with my middle child, but Thomas approached it with the same thoughtful consideration he brought to everything. As I prepared to leave, Thomas walked me to my car. The evening air was cool, scented with the lavender that bordered his front path. "What will you do if Daniel keeps fighting?" he asked. I leaned against my car, considering the question. "Whatever I have to. The vineyard isn't just a business, Thomas. It's your father's legacy. It's my life's work. I won't let it be dismantled or twisted into something we wouldn't recognize." He nodded, understanding the resolve behind my words. "Daniel has always been stubborn. He gets that from you, you know." Despite everything, I laughed. "I suppose he does." The next morning, I arrived at Lakeside Community Bank precisely at 9, dressed in what Michael used to call my business armor, a tailored navy suit that made me feel confident and formidable. Thomas met me in the parking lot, looking somewhat uncomfortable in his own rarely worn suit. "Ready?" I asked him. He straightened his tie. "As I'll ever be." Lawrence Briggs was waiting for us in his office, a well-appointed room with views of the lake. He rose to greet us, his handshake firm. "Mrs. Martinez, thank you for coming in, and this is my son, Thomas Martinez. He'll be joining us for this discussion and will be added as a secondary signatory on all vineyard accounts." If Briggs was surprised by this development, he hid it well. "Of course, please have a seat." He pulled out a folder containing the paperwork Daniel had submitted. Authorization forms with my forged signature, corporate resolutions I had never seen, bank mandates altered to give Daniel full access to all accounts. "As you can see," Briggs explained, "these documents appear to authorize significant changes to your banking arrangements. However, our verification process flagged some inconsistencies, which is why I contacted you." I examined the papers, anger rising as I saw my signature perfectly mimicked on document after document. "These are forgeries, Mr. Briggs. I never signed these documents, nor authorized anyone to sign on my behalf." Briggs nodded gravely. "That's a serious allegation, Mrs. Martinez." "It's not an allegation. It's a fact. I can provide genuine signature samples from recent documents if necessary." "That won't be required." Briggs collected the forged documents and set them aside. "How would you like to proceed?" I glanced at Thomas, who gave me an encouraging nod. "First, I want all these fraudulent documents invalidated and removed from your records. Second, I want to add Thomas as the only additional signatory on all vineyard accounts. Third, I want additional security measures implemented. Call verification. For any significant transactions, two-factor authentication. Whatever protections you offer." "Of course." Briggs pulled out fresh forms. "We can take care of this immediately." As we completed the legitimate paperwork, adding Thomas to the accounts and implementing enhanced security measures, Briggs cleared his throat delicately. "Mrs. Martinez, given the nature of this situation, will you be pursuing legal action regarding the forgeries?" The question hung in the air. Thomas looked at me, clearly wondering the same thing. "Not at this time," I said after a moment's consideration. "But I would appreciate it if the bank kept records of these attempted changes, should I need evidence in the future." "Absolutely," Briggs assured me. "We maintain detailed records of all such incidents." As we left the bank an hour later, I felt both exhausted and relieved. Another attempt thwarted, another safety measure in place. But the fact that I needed to protect myself from my own son was a wound that wouldn't easily heal. "Are you okay?" Thomas asked as we walked to our cars. "I will be," I replied. The morning sun sparkled on Lake Evergreen, sailboats already dotting its blue surface. Life continuing, beautiful and ordinary, even as my family fractured apart. I had just reached my car when a familiar voice called my name. I turned to see Sophia striding across the parking lot, her heels clicking sharply on the pavement, her expression thunderous. "What are you doing, Mom?" she demanded, coming to a stop before us. "Daniel just called me." The The bank contacted him about irregularities with his paperwork. I met her gaze steadily. The irregularities being forged signatures and fraudulent documents. Sophia's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. He was trying to protect the business. By committing fraud? Thomas interjected, disbelief evident in his voice. Sophia shot him a dismissive glance before focusing on me again. This has gone far enough, Mom. First the ownership changes, now freezing Daniel out of the accounts. What's next? Whatever is necessary to protect what your father and I built, I replied calmly. Daniel's actions have only confirmed that my decisions were correct. Sophia stepped closer, lowering her voice, though her intensity remained. He's been running that vineyard for years while you played figurehead. Everyone knows it. The words stung with their mixture of falsehood and just enough truth to wound. While Daniel had indeed taken on more responsibilities in recent years, particularly in sales and distribution, the vineyard had always remained under my active management, something everyone who actually worked there knew well. If that's what you believe, I said, keeping my voice level, then you understand even less about the vineyard than I thought. Thomas moved to stand beside me, a silent show of support that didn't go unnoticed by Sophia. Her expression hardened further. So that's it? You're choosing Thomas over us now? The son who never showed any interest in the family business? This isn't about choosing one child over another, I replied. This is about trust. Daniel tried to forge my signature to gain control of the vineyard's finances. What would you have me do? Pretend it didn't happen? Sophia's professional mask slipped, revealing genuine confusion beneath. I don't understand why you're fighting so hard against us. We were trying to help you, to make things easier during a difficult time. For a moment, I wondered if she truly believed that, if in her mind, their actions had been benevolent, rather than self-serving. The thought was almost more painful than assuming deliberate manipulation. Sophia, I said gently, making things easier for me would have meant asking what I wanted, not deciding for me. It would have meant supporting my recovery, not planning my replacement. She shook her head, frustration evident. You're not being reasonable. You've never been reasonable about the vineyard. It's always been more important to you than anything else, even us. The accusation hung between us, revealing a hurt that apparently ran deeper and longer than I had realized. The vineyard was your father's dream, I said quietly. It became mine too. We built it for all of you, as a legacy, not just as a business to profit from. A legacy that you're now giving away to strangers, she retorted. Not strangers. The people who helped build it alongside us. The community that supported us. And your brother, who may not have worked the land, but understands its value beyond dollar signs. Sophia looked at Thomas, something unreadable passing across her face. I hope you're happy, she said to him. You've always been her favorite, and now you're getting everything without having worked for any of it. Thomas shook his head sadly. That's not true, Soph. I never asked for this. I never wanted any of this to happen. Save it, she snapped, then turned back to me. This isn't over, Mom. Daniel and I won't just stand by while you dismantle everything Dad built. The irony of her statement, that I was the one dismantling what Michael had built, when they had been planning to change everything about how the vineyard operated, was almost too much. But I kept my response simple. It is over, Sophia. The legal documents are signed, the new ownership structure is in place, the bank accounts are secured. You and Daniel have a choice. Accept the new reality and continue being part of the vineyard's future, or fight and risk losing whatever connection you still have to it, and to me. Something flickered in her eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps, or the first recognition that this battle couldn't be won through intimidation or manipulation. We'll see, she said finally, then turned and walked away, back straight, head high, every inch her father's daughter in determination, if not, in principles. Thomas and I watched her go, both of us feeling the weight of what had just transpired. "Do you think they'll ever understand?" he asked softly. I sighed, suddenly feeling every one of my 63 years. "I don't know. I hope so, but I'm not counting on it." As I drove back to the vineyard, my mind was filled with memories of my children when they were young, Daniel proudly helping Michael with his first pruning lesson, Sophia meticulously organizing the tasting room brochures by color and season, Thomas sitting under the oak tree by the picnic area, reading aloud to his siblings during harvest lunch breaks. When had it changed? When had Daniel's pride in learning the business become a sense of entitlement to own it? When had Sophia's organizational skills transformed into a need to control everything and everyone around her? And how had I not seen it happening? The vineyard office was quiet when I arrived, most of the staff out in the fields or working in the production areas. Maria looked up from her desk, concern evident in her expression. "Everything okay, Eleanor? You look troubled." I managed, a small smile. "Just family matters, Maria. Nothing for you to worry about." She didn't look convinced, but nodded anyway. "There's fresh coffee in the kitchen, and Javier left some paperwork for you to sign. The new harvest schedule with the restored budget." I thanked her and headed to my office, grateful for the simple normalcy of routine tasks. The harvest schedule was detailed and thorough, Javier's decades of experience evident in every careful calculation. This was how the vineyard should be run, with attention to detail, respect for the land and the process, understanding of the delicate balance between tradition and innovation. As I reviewed the documents, a knock sounded at my door. I looked up to see Marcus Freeman standing there, his expression grave. "Marcus," I said, surprised. "I wasn't expecting you." "I apologize for dropping in unannounced," he said, entering, and closing the door behind him. "But I thought you should know. Daniel and Sophia came to see me yesterday afternoon." My heart sank. "Let me guess. They want to contest the trust arrangements." Marcus nodded, taking a seat across from me. "They claim you were under extreme emotional and medical stress when you made the decisions, that you weren't of sound mind." "And what did you tell them?" "The truth. That you were remarkably clear-headed and determined, that we discussed all options thoroughly, and that in my professional opinion your decisions were sound and rational." I smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Marcus." He set his briefcase on the desk and opened it, pulling out a folder. "That's not why I'm here, though. They mentioned something that concerned me. Daniel's attempt to access the bank accounts." "Yes, we just came from the bank. He forged my signature on several documents." Marcus's eyebrows rose. "That's a serious crime, Eleanor." "I'm aware. For now, I've chosen not to pursue it legally." He nodded, understanding my reluctance to escalate the situation further. "Nevertheless, it suggests they're not planning to accept the new arrangements." Quietly. "I've brought some additional documents for you to consider. Restraining orders preventing them from making financial or legal decisions on your behalf without explicit verified consent." I stared at the papers he placed before me, each one representing another severing of trust with my children. "Is this really necessary, Marcus?" "I hope not," he admitted. "But given what's already happened, I believe it's prudent to have these prepared. You don't need to file them unless there's another incident." I nodded slowly, the reality of the situation settling over me like a heavy cloak. This was what it had come to: legal protections against my own children. "There's one more thing," Marcus continued. "Daniel mentioned contacting some of your distributors and key accounts, apparently positioning himself as the new decision-maker for the vineyard." Alarm coursed through me. "When?" "Yesterday and this morning, according to what he told me." He seemed quite confident that he could convince them to deal with him directly, bypassing you entirely. This was worse than I'd imagined. Not just internal power struggles, but attempts to undermine the vineyard's business relationships I had carefully nurtured for decades. "Thank you for telling me," I said, already reaching for my phone. "I need to contact them immediately." Marcus nodded, standing to leave. "I'll let you handle that. Just remember, Eleanor, you're in the right here. Don't let them make you doubt yourself." After he left, I spent the next 2 hours calling every major distributor, retail account, and restaurant partner the vineyard had. Most had, indeed, heard from Daniel, though their reactions varied. Some were confused by the conflicting messages. Others were concerned about potential management instability. A few had already begun to reconsider their orders for the coming season. With each call, I patiently explained the situation in the most diplomatic terms possible. A family disagreement about succession planning, nothing that would affect production quality or delivery schedules. I emphasized my continued leadership, the vineyard's stability, the upcoming harvest's promising outlook. Most seemed reassured, though I could sense lingering questions in some conversations. By late afternoon, I was emotionally exhausted, but satisfied that I had contained the damage. I sat back in my chair, gazing out at the vineyard stretching beyond my office window. The late summer sun gilded the ripening grapes, a sight that had never failed to fill me with a sense of accomplishment and continuity. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Thomas stood in the doorway, his expression concerned. "How are you holding up?" he asked, stepping inside. I gestured for him to sit. "I've been better." Daniel contacted our distributors, trying to position himself as the new decision-maker. Thomas winced. "That's low, even for him. Were you able to fix it?" "I think so, for now." "But the damage to those relationships." I shook my head. "Trust takes years to build and moments to destroy." "Like family relationships," Thomas observed quietly. The simple truth of that statement hung between us. The past weeks had changed everything. My perception of my children, their perception of me. The dynamics that had defined our family for decades. "I never thought it would come to this," I admitted. "When your father and I started the vineyard, we imagined it bringing the family together, not tearing it apart." Thomas was silent for a moment, considering his words carefully. "Maybe that's still possible. Not the way you imagined, but in a new way." "What do you mean?" "The scholarship trust, it's going to help a lot of families, create opportunities that might not have existed otherwise. That's a kind of togetherness, isn't it? A broader family?" I looked at my middle child with new appreciation. While Daniel and Sophia had been fighting for control, Thomas had been seeing the bigger picture, understanding the true purpose behind the vineyard's creation. Not just profit or prestige, but community, connection, continuity. "Yes," I said, softly. "It is." We sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, both lost in thought. Finally, Thomas spoke again. "What will you do if they keep fighting? If they try something else?" I considered the restraining order document still sitting on my desk, the bank's record of the forged signatures, the calls I'd just made to repair damaged business relationships. "Whatever I have to," I replied simply. "I won't let them destroy what your father and I built, either through greed or spite." Thomas nodded, understanding the resolve behind my words. "I'm with you, Mom. Whatever you need." As he left, I realized something had shifted within me. The hurt and betrayal were still there, the sense of loss still acute. But alongside them was something new. A clarity of purpose, a certainty about the path forward. My children's actions had forced me to see them as they truly were, not as I wished them to be. It was painful, yes, but also liberating. The vineyard would continue. The grapes would be harvested. The wine would be made. The land would remain intact. The business practices ethical. The community supported. With or without Daniel and Sophia's acceptance, this was the future I would ensure, the future Michael and I had always envisioned. I picked up the phone one last time, dialing a number I hadn't called in months. Hello? The voice was warm, slightly surprised. Lucia, I said, it's Eleanor Martinez. I was wondering if you'd be free for dinner this evening. Lucia Garcia had been my closest friend since the early days of the vineyard. As the wife of our first vineyard manager, she had worked alongside me, helping with everything from harvest to bookkeeping to raising children while building a business. Though her husband had passed away 2 years before Michael, she remained connected to the vineyard through her son, who now managed our production team. Eleanor, of course I'm free. Is everything all right? I've been hearing rumors. That's partly why I'm calling, I admitted. I could use a friend right now. Say no more. My place or yours? Mine, if that's all right. 7 o'clock? I'll bring the dessert. And Eleanor? Whatever's happening, we'll get through it. As I hung up, I felt another piece of strength return to me. I had been so focused on my children's betrayal that I'd forgotten the other connections that sustained me. Friendships built over decades, community ties that remained strong, the extended family of the vineyard. I gathered my things and headed home to prepare for dinner with Lucia, determined to share the full story with someone who would understand both my pain and my determination. Tonight would be about remembering who I was beyond being a mother, a friend, a businesswoman, a creator of something lasting and meaningful. Daniel and Sophia might continue their fight, but they would find me ready. Not just standing firm, but moving forward, surrounded by support they had never thought to consider. The true strength of the community their father and I had built over a lifetime of work and love. The first rays of dawn filtered through my bedroom window, painting the walls with soft, golden light. I had slept better than I had in weeks, perhaps because of the dinner with Lucia the night before. We had talked for hours, reminiscing about the early days of the vineyard when everything was a struggle but full of possibility, when Michael was still alive and our children were young, untainted by greed or entitlement. Lucia had listened to my story without judgment, offering perspective from someone who had known us all for decades. They're scared, Eleanor, she had said as we shared the last of a bottle of our award-winning Cabernet. Not just of losing their inheritance, but of losing their place in the story they've been telling themselves. Daniel always saw himself as the heir apparent. Sophia always saw herself as the protector, the organizer. You've rewritten the story, and they don't know their roles anymore. Her words had stayed with me through the night. Perhaps there was truth in them, but understanding my children's fear didn't excuse their actions. Some lines, once crossed, changed relationships forever. I dressed with particular care that morning, a deep burgundy blouse that Michael had always loved, tailored black pants, the simple gold necklace he had given me on our 30th anniversary. Today wasn't just another day at the vineyard, it was the first day of harvest planning, the official beginning of the most important season in the winemaking year. The kitchen was quiet as I made my coffee, the house empty in a way that felt both peaceful and slightly melancholy. For decades, harvest planning had been a family event. Michael would spread maps of the vineyard across the dining table, and we would plot out the picking schedule together, factoring in weather forecasts, grape varieties, and labor availability. In recent years, Daniel had joined these sessions, bringing distribution forecasts and sales projections. Even Sophia would stop by with meticulously organized spreadsheets tracking previous year's yields. This year would be different. I couldn't rely on them anymore, but I wasn't alone. Thomas had promised to come by later, and Javier's expertise was worth more than Daniel's business school theories had ever been. As I drove to the vineyard, the morning mist was just beginning to lift from the lake, revealing the shimmer of sunlight on water. It was going to be a beautiful day, warm but not hot, with the light breeze that was perfect for the final ripening stages. The vineyard parking lot was already half full when I arrived. Harvest preparation always brought a buzz of energy to the property, with seasonal workers returning, equipment being readied, and production areas cleaned to pristine condition. I loved this time of year. The anticipation, the connection, to cycles of growth and renewal that had guided human lives for millennia. Maria looked up with a smile as I entered the main office. "Good morning, Eleanor. You look rested." "I feel it," I admitted. "Is everyone here for the planning meeting?" "Almost. Javier is checking the east field one last time, and Thomas called to say he's running about 10 minutes late. Something about a faculty meeting that ran long." I nodded, pleased that Thomas had called ahead, that he was taking his new role seriously. "And the others?" I asked, not needing to specify whom I meant. Maria's expression grew careful. "Daniel called early this morning. He said he wouldn't be attending unless specifically invited by you." I sighed, both relieved and saddened. At least he wasn't planning to disrupt the meeting, but his absence would be noticed. "And Sophia?" "No word." "Very well. We'll start in the conference room in 15 minutes. Could you make sure the yield projections are ready? And ask Carlos to bring in the weather forecast data." The conference room slowly filled with key personnel: Javier and his assistant winemakers, Maria with her administrative team, Carlos from maintenance, the heads of our processing crew and field management team. Thomas slipped in just as we were about to begin, mouthing an apology as he took a seat near the back. I caught his eye and smiled reassuringly. "Good morning, everyone," I began, standing at the head of the table just as I had for decades. "As you all know, we're approaching our most critical season. Today, we'll be finalizing our harvest schedule, assigning teams, and reviewing quality control protocols." For the next 2 hours, we worked through the complex logistics of bringing in tens of thousands of pounds of grapes at precisely the right moment of ripeness. Which fields would be picked first? Which varietals needed additional time on the vine? How many workers would be needed for each section? Which equipment required maintenance before the rush began? Thomas remained quiet initially, observing and learning. But as the meeting progressed, he began asking thoughtful questions about sustainability practices, about the welfare provisions for seasonal workers, about the quality control measures that had earned Martinez wines their reputation for excellence. Javier caught my eye across the table, giving me a subtle nod of approval. Thomas might not have Daniel's business experience or Sophia's organizational skills, but he brought something different, a genuine concern for the human element of winemaking, an appreciation for the artistry involved rather than just the profit potential. As the meeting concluded and people gathered their notes, Javier approached me. "It's going to be a good harvest, Eleanor. The test clusters are showing excellent sugar acid balance, especially in the Cabernet and Merlot blocks." "That's wonderful news," I replied, truly pleased. The quality of this harvest would be particularly important given the recent upheaval. He hesitated, then added more quietly, "I heard about what happened with Daniel and the bank accounts. The forged signatures." News traveled fast in small communities like ours. "Yes, well, that's been addressed." Javier nodded, his weathered face serious. "Just so you know, the Vineyard team is behind you. 100%. What you did with the scholarship trust. People won't forget that." His words warmed me unexpectedly. In focusing on the betrayal by my children, I had perhaps underestimated the support I had from the broader Vineyard family. "Thank you, Javier. That means more than you know." As the conference room emptied, Thomas approached, notebook in hand. That was fascinating. I had no idea harvest planning was so complex. I smiled at him. "Your father used to say making great wine is like raising children. It requires patience, attention to detail, and knowing when to intervene versus when to let nature take its course." "Sounds like Dad," Thomas said, his expression softening with memory. He always had a perfect metaphor for everything. We walked together toward my office, discussing the meeting and what Thomas had learned, when Maria appeared in the doorway, her expression troubled. "Eleanor, there's someone here to see you. Mark Reynolds from Lakeview Development." I frowned, the name immediately familiar. Lakeview Development was the company that had been trying to buy portions of our land for years, particularly the IA's original field that bordered the lake. They had visions of luxury condominiums with vineyard views, a plan Michael and I had repeatedly rejected despite increasingly generous offers. "Show him in," I said, wondering what had prompted this unexpected visit. Mark Reynolds was a polished man in his 40s, with the confident manner of someone used to getting his way. He shook my hand firmly, nodding to Thomas as well. "Mrs. Martinez, thank you for seeing me without an appointment. I was in the area and thought I'd stop by." "Of course, Mr. Reynolds. What can I do for you?" He settled into a chair, smoothing his tie. "I understand there have been some changes at Martinez Family Vineyards recently." My guard immediately went up. How would he know about internal family matters unless someone had told him? "The vineyard continues to operate as it always has, Mr. Reynolds." He smiled, a practiced expression that didn't reach his eyes. "That's not what I heard. In fact, I recently had a very productive conversation with your son Daniel about the potential sale of the lakefront parcel." The room seemed to still. Beside me, Thomas tensed visibly. "My son has no authority to discuss the sale of any portion of this property," I said, keeping my voice level despite the anger rising within me. Reynolds appeared unperturbed. He seemed quite confident that the sale would proceed. He mentioned that as the incoming CEO, he was reassessing the vineyard's land holdings and focusing on core productive areas. So that was Daniel's new angle. Approaching potential buyers directly, presenting himself as the decision-maker despite having no legal authority to do so. It was both desperate and dangerously close to fraud. "Mr. Reynolds," I said carefully, "I am the owner and CEO of Martinez Family Vineyards. No land sales have been approved, nor are any being considered at this time." If Daniel suggested otherwise, he was misrepresenting his position and authority. Reynolds's expression shifted slightly, the first hint of uncertainty appearing. "I see. That's disappointing to hear." He was quite persuasive about the benefits for both parties. I'm sure he was, but the fact remains that the lakefront parcel is not for sale. It never has been, and it never will be. That land holds the original vines my husband and I planted. It's not merely property, it's our foundation. He studied me for a moment, clearly recalculating his approach. "Mrs. Martinez, the offer we discussed with Daniel was significantly higher than our previous proposals. Perhaps if you heard the details, the amount is irrelevant, Mr. Reynolds. Some things aren't for sale at any price." His polite veneer cracked slightly. "With all due respect, Mrs. Martinez, that's a sentimental rather than business-minded approach. The lakefront parcel represents a small percentage of your total acreage, but could command a premium that would allow you to expand operations elsewhere." Thomas stepped forward slightly. "I believe my mother has made her position clear, Mr. Reynolds." Reynolds glanced at Thomas dismissively before turning back to me. "Perhaps you should consider the practical aspects. The property taxes on lakefront land continue to rise. The vines in that section are among your oldest with declining yields. From a purely business perspective—" "Mr. Reynolds," I interrupted, firmly, "Martinez Family Vineyards is not a purely business venture. It's a legacy, a commitment to the land and to winemaking as an art. Those oldest vines produce our reserve wines, which, as you may know, consistently receive the highest ratings and command premium prices." He sighed, recognizing defeat, at least for now. "I understand. Still, should you reconsider, our offer remains open." He stood, straightening his jacket. "And, Mrs. Martinez, you might want to have a conversation with your son about his communications regarding vineyard assets. After he left, Thomas and I looked at each other in shared disbelief. "He was actually trying to sell off part of the vineyard?" Thomas asked, running a hand through his hair in a gesture reminiscent of his father. "Without any authority?" "It seems so," I replied, the full implications sinking in. Daniel hadn't just been trying to take control. He had been actively making arrangements to dismantle what his father and I had built, piece by profitable piece. "What are you going to do?" I moved to the window, looking out at the vineyard stretching across the rolling hills, the original lakefront plot visible in the distance. "I need to speak with Marcus again, and I think it's time I had another conversation with Daniel." The restraining order documents still sat in my desk drawer, unsigned. I had hoped they wouldn't be necessary, that Daniel and Sophia would eventually accept the new reality. Now I wasn't so sure. "Should I come with you?" Thomas asked. I shook my head. "This is between Daniel and me, but thank you." I found my oldest son at his home, a sprawling contemporary house on the opposite side of the lake from mine. Grace answered the door, surprise and wariness evident in her expression. "Eleanor, we weren't expecting you." "I need to speak with Daniel," I said simply. "Is he home?" She hesitated, then nodded, stepping back to allow me inside. "He's in his office. I'll tell him you're here." The house was immaculate as always, decorated in the modern, minimalist style Grace preferred. I waited in the living room, taking in the expensive furniture, the original artwork, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. Daniel and Grace had done well for themselves, he with his position at the vineyard, she with her interior design business that catered to wealthy clients. They had a comfortable life, yet apparently it wasn't enough. Daniel appeared in the doorway, his expression guarded. "Mom, this is unexpected." "Mark Reynolds came to see me today," I said without preamble. "He seemed to think he was purchasing our lakefront property based on discussions with you." Daniel's face betrayed nothing, but his hands, so like his father's, clenched slightly at his sides. "Reynolds exaggerates. We had a preliminary conversation, nothing more." "A conversation you had no authority to initiate. The vineyard land isn't yours to sell, Daniel. It never has been." He moved further into the room, his posture defensive. "I was exploring options, that's all. The lakefront parcel is underutilized. The vines there are past their prime. It made sense to consider Reynolds' offer. Those vines are our heritage stock, the source of our best wines. Heritage doesn't pay the bills, Mom. Sentiment doesn't fund expansion." I studied my son, trying to reconcile the ambitious, calculating man before me with the boy who had once followed Michael through the vineyard with wide-eyed wonder, learning the names of each grape variety, helping to build the trellises for new plantings. "When did it become only about money for you, Daniel? When did you stop seeing the vineyard as something more than a business to exploit?" His expression hardened. "That's unfair. I've dedicated my career to growing the vineyard's sales, expanding our distribution, building the brand. Yes, you have. And you've been well compensated for that work. But somewhere along the way, you started seeing the vineyard as yours to command rather than ours to steward. Because Dad always told me it would be." The words burst from him with unexpected force. From the time I was old enough to understand, he talked about how someday I would take over, how I was learning the business so I could lead it into the future. Lead it, Daniel, not dismantle it, not sell off its heart for condominium development. I shook my head, disappointment heavy in my chest. Your father would never have approved of selling that land. Never. Daniel's face flushed with anger. You don't get to decide what Dad would have wanted. You've already changed everything with this trust arrangement, cutting me out of what should have been mine. The vineyard was never just yours, Daniel. It was always meant to benefit the entire family, including Thomas, and the community that helped build it. Thomas, he scoffed. who never showed any interest until there was something to gain. Your brother has always loved the vineyard in his own way. He may not have wanted a career in winemaking, but he respects what it represents. Daniel paced the room, agitation evident in every movement. So what now? You've come to lecture me about talking to Reynolds? Message received. I've come to make something very clear, I said, my voice firm. If you attempt to represent yourself as having authority over vineyard assets again, to banks, to buyers, to anyone, there will be legal consequences. He stopped, staring at me with disbelief. You'd sue your own son? I'd protect what your father and I built from anyone who threatens it. Even you. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of what had been said, boundaries drawn, that had never before been necessary between us. You know what hurts the most? Daniel finally said, his voice quieter now. It's not the trust arrangement or giving Thomas a share he didn't earn. It's that you don't trust me. After everything I've done for the vineyard, you think I would destroy it. I looked at my firstborn, the child who had once been all possibility and promise. I trusted you, Daniel, with my health concerns, with the business operations, with your father's legacy. And you responded by trying to seize control, by forging documents, by making plans to sell our founding property. You destroyed that trust. Yourself. He had no response to that, no counter-argument that could undo the reality of his actions. I should go, I said, moving toward the door. I've said what I came to say. Wait, Daniel called as I reached the entryway. I turned back to see him standing in the center of his perfect living room, suddenly looking less confident than I could ever remember. Is there a way back from this? A way to fix it? The question caught me off guard. The first sign of vulnerability, of recognition that something precious had been damaged. I don't know, I answered honestly. That depends on your choices going forward. The drive back to the vineyard was filled with conflicting emotions. The confrontation with Daniel had been necessary but painful, reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal. Yet there had been that moment at the end, that question about finding a way back, that suggested perhaps he understood, finally, the magnitude of what he had done. When I arrived back at the office, I found Thomas waiting for me, concern evident in his expression. How did it go? He asked as I sank into my chair. About as well as could be expected, I replied wearily. He admitted to the conversations with Reynolds but tried to justify them as exploring options. Thomas nodded, unsurprised. That sounds like Daniel, always able to rationalize his actions. He asked if there was a way to fix things, I added. Between us, I mean. Thomas looked thoughtful. And what did you tell him? That it would depend on his choices going forward. That's fair, he said. Trust has to be earned back. We sat in companionable silence for a moment, both lost in thought. Through the window, the afternoon sun illuminated the vineyard, the rows of vines stretching across the hillsides like lines of musical notation, each one part of a greater harmony. I've been thinking, Thomas said finally, about the scholarship trust. What about it? I'd like to help set up the administration, design the application process, the selection criteria, maybe even develop mentorship opportunities for the recipients. It's the kind of work I already do with my students, just on a larger scale. I studied my middle child, seeing in him a compassion and thoughtfulness that made my heart swell with pride. I think that's a wonderful idea, Thomas. I spoke with Javier earlier, he continued. He mentioned that his granddaughter Maria wants to study viticulture at UC Davis. She'd be a perfect first candidate when she graduates high school next year. Yes, she would. She spent every summer since she was 14 helping in the fields and the lab. That's the kind of connection I want the trust to recognize. Not just financial need, but genuine passion for winemaking, for the land, for continuing the traditions. I reached across the desk to squeeze his hand, reminded suddenly and powerfully of Michael, not in Thomas's appearance, which had always favored my side of the family, but in his values, his vision of the vineyard as more than a business. "Your father would be so proud of you," I said softly. Thomas smiled, a mixture of pleasure and sadness in his eyes. "I hope so." The moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Maria stood there, an envelope in her hand. "This just arrived by courier," she said, passing it to me. "From Lakeside Community Bank." I waited until she had left to open it, an uneasy feeling growing as I recognized the formal letterhead. "What is it?" Thomas asked, noting my expression. "The bank is notifying me that a formal complaint has been filed regarding the recent changes to our account authorizations," I said, scanning the document. "They're requesting a meeting with all interested parties to resolve the dispute." "Daniel?" Thomas sighed. "He's not giving up." "It seems not," I agreed, setting the letter aside. "But neither am I." Over the next days, the vineyard hummed with pre-harvest energy. Equipment was checked and double-checked. Temporary workers arrived and were assigned housing. The processing facility was prepared for the tons of grapes that would soon flow through it. Through it all, I maintained a presence, walking the rows with Javier, consulting with the production team, reviewing quality control protocols. Thomas divided his time between his teaching responsibilities and learning the vineyard operations, absorbing everything with the same thoughtful attention he brought to his literature classes. The team responded well to him, appreciating his genuine interest in their work and his lack of pretension. No further word came from Daniel or Sophia, though I knew the bank meeting loomed on the horizon. Marcus advised me to bring all documentation of Daniel's previous attempts to circumvent proper procedures, the forged signatures, the unauthorized contact with Reynolds, the misleading communications with distributors. "Be prepared for this. To get contentious," he warned during our preparation meeting. "From what I can tell, Daniel has engaged his own attorney, someone with a reputation for aggressive tactics." "I'm not surprised," I replied, thinking of my son's determination, his inability to accept defeat. "But the facts are on our side." Facts in law, yes, but family conflicts are rarely decided on those alone. There will be emotion involved, attempts to paint you as vindictive or irrational. I nodded, understanding his concern. "I'm prepared for that." The evening before the bank meeting, I walked through the vineyard alone as the setting sun bathed everything in golden light. It was my favorite time of day, when the heat began to dissipate and a gentle breeze carried the scent of ripening grapes through the rows. I found myself in the original field, the lakefront parcel that Daniel had tried to sell, where Michael and I had planted our first vines 35 years ago. Some of these plants were showing their age, it was true. Their yields were lower than the newer blocks, higher on the hillside. But the wines they produced had a depth and complexity that couldn't be replicated, the result of roots that had spent decades working their way through the rocky soil, adapting to its particular chemistry and composition. I ran my hand along, an ancient trunk, feeling the rough bark beneath my fingers. These vines had been here through every milestone, the birth of our children, the growth of the business, Michael's illness, and death. They were living witnesses to our story, and Daniel had been willing to uproot them for condominium development. "I won't let that happen," I promised aloud, my voice soft in the evening stillness. "Not as long as I'm here." A figure appeared. At the end of the row, Thomas coming to find me as dusk settled over the vineyard. "Mom, Maria said you might be out here." I smiled, waiting as he made his way toward me. "Just checking on our oldest residents." He glanced around at the gnarled vines. "Daniel really wanted to sell this parcel?" "Yes, for luxury condominiums." Thomas shook his head in disbelief. "I don't understand him sometimes. How could he not see the value here? Not just monetary value, but heritage," I supplied. "Connection, continuity." "Exactly." He reached out to touch one of the ancient trunks, his gesture unconsciously mirroring mine from moments earlier. These vines were here when I was born. They'll be here long after we're gone if we protect them. That's why I created the trust, I said, to ensure they would be protected, regardless of what happens to me. Thomas nodded, understanding. Are you ready for tomorrow? The bank meeting? As ready as I can be. I gazed out over the field toward the lake, now turning deep blue in the fading light. I never thought I'd be fighting my own children over Michael's legacy. Not all your children, Thomas said quietly. I'm with you, Mom, and I think Dad would be too if he were here. We walked back to the main building together as darkness fell, a sense of calm certainty settling over me. Tomorrow would be difficult, confrontational, perhaps even ugly. But tonight, the vineyard was peaceful, the harvest approaching, the legacy secure. Whatever happened at the bank, whatever Daniel and Sophia tried next, I would face it with the same determination that had helped me build this place from nothing, the same strength that had carried me through Michael's illness and death, the same clarity that had guided my decision to protect what mattered most, even when doing so meant standing against my own children. The future of Martinez Family Vineyards would not be determined by those who saw it as a commodity to be exploited, but by those who understood its true value, as a living connection to the past and a promise to generations yet to come. As we reached my car, Thomas paused, looking back at the darkened vineyard. It's going to be all right, isn't it? Whatever happens tomorrow. I followed his gaze, seeing beyond the present challenges to the harvest that would soon begin, to the wines that would be made, to the lives that would be touched by the scholarship trust in years to come. Yes, I said with quiet certainty. It's going to be more than all right. The morning of the bank meeting dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect late summer day that makes Lakeside shine. I dressed with deliberate care, a tailored navy, suit that conveyed authority without ostentation, my mother's pearl earrings, comfortable but elegant shoes. Today would require both strength and endurance. Marcus met me outside Lakeside Community Bank, his briefcase bulging with documentation. Thomas arrived moments later, looking professional in the one good suit he owned for parent-teacher conferences and school events. Are you ready? Marcus asked, his expression conveying both concern and determination. I've been ready since. I found those documents, I replied, straightening my shoulders. Let's end this. The bank's conference room was already occupied when we entered. Daniel sat on one side of the long table, a slick-looking attorney beside him. Sophia was there too, her face a careful mask of professional neutrality. Lawrence Briggs from the bank sat at the head of the table, flanked by two colleagues I didn't recognize. Mrs. Martinez, thank you for coming, Briggs began, his tone formal. As you know, we've called this meeting to address concerns regarding the recent changes to the authorization structure of the Martinez Family Vineyards accounts. I nodded, taking my seat across from Daniel. Thomas settled beside me, while Marcus arranged his documents methodically. To be clear, Briggs continued, the bank has no position on family business matters. Our sole concern is ensuring that account access follows proper legal protocols and reflects the authorized ownership structure of the business. Daniel's attorney leaned forward. My client contends that the recent changes were made under questionable circumstances and do not reflect the operational reality of the business. Marcus raised an eyebrow. And your client is? Daniel Martinez, sales director of Martinez Family Vineyards and heir apparent to the company leadership. I couldn't help the small, incredulous laugh that escaped me. Heir apparent? This isn't a monarchy, Mr. Reynolds, Howard Reynolds. An interesting coincidence, the same surname as the developer who had approached me about buying our original parcel. Perhaps they were related, or perhaps Daniel had deliberately chosen an attorney connected to his would-be business partner. Mr. Reynolds, Marcus responded smoothly. The ownership structure of Martinez Family Vineyards is clearly documented. Ms. Eleanor Martinez holds 40% ownership. Mr. Thomas Martinez holds 20%. The remaining 40% is held in the Michael Martinez Memorial Trust. Your client is an employee of the vineyard, a valued one with significant responsibilities, but an employee nonetheless. Daniel's face flushed with anger. I've run that vineyard for years, while my mother played figurehead. Daniel, Sophia warned quietly, placing a restraining hand on his arm. Briggs cleared his throat. Perhaps we should focus on the specific banking matters at hand. Mr. Martinez has alleged that changes to the account authorizations were made when Mrs. Martinez was in a vulnerable state, possibly under undue influence. That's absurd, Thomas interjected, unable to contain himself. Mom made these decisions with full clarity after discovering Daniel had attempted to forge her signature on banking documents. Reynolds smiled thinly. An allegation without proof. Marcus slid a folder across the table to Briggs. These are copies of the documents Daniel Martinez submitted to this bank 3 weeks ago, containing forged signatures purporting to be Eleanor's. The bank's own verification process flagged these as potentially fraudulent, which is how Mrs. Martinez learned of them. Briggs opened the folder, reviewing the documents with a frown. Yes, these were indeed flagged by our security department. Furthermore, Marcus continued, producing another folder, we have documentation of Mr. Martinez's unauthorized communications with vineyard distributors, presenting himself as the new decision-maker for the company. And most recently, evidence of his discussions with Lakeview Development regarding the sale of vineyard property without any legal authority to do so. I watched Daniel's face as Marcus methodically laid out the evidence of his various attempts to seize control. His expression shifted from defiance to something closer to concern as he whispered urgently to his attorney. Sophia leaned forward. This is getting out of hand. We're here about the bank accounts, not these other allegations. They're relevant, I said, meeting her gaze steadily. They establish a pattern of behavior, attempting to take control of vineyard assets through inappropriate means. Reynolds tried to redirect. My client has devoted his career to growing the vineyard business. His concern was ensuring continuity during what appeared to be a serious health crisis for his mother. By forging documents? Thomas asked incredulously. By trying to sell off the original vineyard parcel? Daniel glared at him. You know nothing about running a business, Thomas. Sometimes difficult decisions need to be made. Selling our founding vineyard wasn't a difficult decision, I interjected. It was a betrayal of everything your father and I built. Briggs raised his hands, trying to restore order. Please, let's focus on the banking matter specifically. Mrs. Martinez, when you added Thomas as a signatory and removed Daniel's access, were you acting of your own free will? Were you mentally competent to make that decision? Absolutely, I replied firmly. I made these changes after discovering unauthorized attempts to access the accounts. My medical condition, which turned out to be benign, had no bearing on my mental capacity. We have her doctor's statement confirming this, Marcus added, producing yet another document. Dr. Winters has attested that Mrs. Martinez showed no signs of cognitive impairment at any point during her treatment. Reynolds whispered something to Daniel, who shook his head stubbornly. Sophia watched this exchange with a calculating expression before suddenly straightening in her seat. This isn't productive, she said with unexpected authority. Daniel, the evidence is clear. The forged documents alone. She turned to me, her professional facade cracking slightly to reveal something more vulnerable. Mom, I had no knowledge of the forged bank documents or the discussions with Lakeview Development. That wasn't part of what we discussed. Daniel stared at his sister in disbelief. Sophia, what are you doing? She ignored him, focusing on me. I still believe our original concerns were valid. Ensuring business continuity given your health, scare. But these other actions. She shook her head. They cross a line. The room fell silent as we all absorbed this unexpected shift. Sophia was distancing herself from Daniel's more egregious actions, attempting to salvage her own position. It was a calculated move, but it also revealed the first crack in their united front. "Mrs. Martinez," Briggs said after a moment, "in light of the documentation provided, and Ms. Sophia Martinez's statement, the bank is satisfied that the current account structure reflects the legal ownership and management of Martinez family vineyards. Unless substantial new evidence is presented, we consider this matter closed." Daniel stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. "This isn't over," he said, his voice tight with anger. "The vineyard is my birthright. Dad promised me." "Your father promised you would have a place at the vineyard," I interrupted, rising to face him. "A place you still have, if you choose to accept it. What he never promised was that you could dismantle what we built or sell it, off piece by piece." He gathered his papers with jerky movements, his attorney looking increasingly uncomfortable beside him. "You'll regret this, Mom. When the vineyard needs capital for expansion, when you can't keep up with changing market demands, you'll wish you had listened to me." "Perhaps," I acknowledged, "but I'd rather face those challenges with our integrity intact than sell our soul for short-term gain." Daniel stormed out, his attorney hurrying after him. Sophia remained seated, her expression unreadable as she watched them go. "Well," Marcus said into the silence that followed, "I believe our business here is concluded. Thank you, Mr. Briggs, for your time." As we prepared to leave, Sophia approached me. "Mom, can we talk? Privately?" Thomas and Marcus exchanged glances. "We'll wait for you outside," Thomas said, touching my arm lightly before they exited. When we were alone, Sophia sat beside me, her usual poise momentarily absent. "I want you to know I had no idea about the forged documents or the development deal. Daniel told me he was handling the financial transition, but I never thought he would." She trailed off, shaking her head. "But you knew about the power of attorney documents," I pointed out. "About restructuring the vineyard management. About cutting Thomas out." She had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Yes. And I still believe some of those changes made business sense. But I wouldn't have approved of forgery or selling the original parcel." She hesitated. "Dad loved that land." "Yes, he did," I agreed softly. "More than anywhere else on the property." Sophia studied her perfectly manicured hands. "Where do we go from here, Mom? Daniel won't back down easily. He genuinely believes he deserves to run the vineyard." "That's for Daniel to work through," I replied. "As for you and me, that depends on what you want, Sophia. The vineyard still needs your skills, your organizational talents, but only if you can accept that it will never be what you and Daniel planned." She nodded slowly. "I need some time to think about what I want, about what's important." She stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced hands. "For what it's worth, I am glad your health news was positive. That was never. We were genuinely worried." "I know," I said, and I did believe that much. Their methods had been unconscionable, but the initial concern had likely been real. "Take the time you need, Sophia. The door remains open." Outside, Thomas and Marcus waited by Thomas's car. The morning had warmed considerably, the late summer sun beating down on the parking lot. "How did it go with Sophia?" Thomas asked. As I approached. "Better than expected," I admitted. "She's distancing herself from Daniel's actions, trying to find a middle ground." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Smart move on her part. Daniel's position is becoming untenable." As we discussed next steps, my phone buzzed with a text message from Javier. "Urgent situation at Vineyard. Please come when you can." A flutter of anxiety went through me. "I need to get to the vineyard," I told Thomas and Marcus. "Javier says there's something urgent." I'll come with you, Thomas offered immediately. Marcus closed his briefcase. I'll follow up with the bank to ensure all the account protections are firmly in place. Call me if you need anything else. The drive to the vineyard was tense, my mind racing with possibilities. Had equipment broken down? Was there a problem with the irrigation system? A pest infestation? The harvest was too important to risk. Any complications? As we pulled into the vineyard parking lot, I was surprised to see several unfamiliar vehicles, including a police car. Thomas and I exchanged concerned glances before hurrying toward the main building. Maria met us at the door, her expression troubled. Eleanor, thank goodness you're here. There's been an incident in the East Field. What kind of incident? I asked, following her through the building and out onto the terrace that overlooked the property. Daniel showed up about an hour ago, extremely agitated. He went straight to the equipment shed and took the bulldozer. My heart dropped. The bulldozer? What for? Maria's voice shook slightly. He drove it to the original field, the lakefront parcel, started tearing up vines, saying if he couldn't have it, nobody would. Javier and the crew tried to stop him, but he was not himself. Someone called the police. I hurried down the terrace steps, Thomas close behind me. In the distance, I could see a cluster of people at the edge of the original field. As we approached, the damage became visible. Several rows of our oldest vines uprooted and broken. The carefully tended soil churned into ugly mounds. The police had Daniel sitting in the back of their cruiser. He wasn't handcuffed, but his body language, hunched shoulders, head down, suggested defeat rather than defiance. Javier stood nearby, explaining something to an officer, gesturing toward the damaged vines. My God, Thomas murmured beside me, taking in the destruction. He really did it. The sight of those ancient vines, plants that had produced our award-winning wines for decades, that Michael had tended with such care, lying broken on the ground sent a wave of grief through me so profound it was almost physical. This wasn't just property damage. It was the willful destruction of living history. Javier spotted us and hurried over. Eleanor, I'm so sorry. We tried to stop him, but he was like a man possessed. How bad is it? I asked, forcing myself to assess the damage clinically despite the ache in my heart. He destroyed about 20 vines before Carlos managed to shut down the bulldozer. They're some of our oldest, but it could have been much worse. One of the officers approached us. Mrs. Martinez, I'm Officer Reyes. I understand you're the owner of this property. I nodded, pulling my attention away from the damaged vineyard. Yes, that's correct. We've detained your son for destruction of property. Would you like to press charges? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. I looked toward the police cruiser where Daniel sat, then back at the destroyed vines, decades of growth and care obliterated in moments of rage. May I speak with him first? I asked. Officer Reyes hesitated, then nodded. Briefly. We'll need to take him to the station for processing regardless of whether you press charges given the extent of the damage. I walked toward the cruiser, each step feeling heavier than the last. The officer opened the back door, and I leaned down to see Daniel. He looked up, his expression a mixture of defiance and despair that broke my heart despite everything. Are you happy now? He asked, his voice rough. You've won. I've lost everything. I studied my firstborn, trying to see past the anger to the boy I had raised, the son who had once loved this land as much as his father and I did. Why, Daniel? Why destroy something so precious? His hands clenched in his lap. You took it. All away. My future, my leadership, my inheritance. Everything I've worked for. I restructured ownership, yes. But your position was secure. Your future at the vineyard was still there if you wanted it. He laughed bitterly. As what? An employee? Taking orders instead of giving them? as a valued leader who could have continued building on your father's legacy. I shook my head, genuine sadness welling up. But instead, you've destroyed part of that legacy today. Daniel looked past me to the damaged vineyard, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of regret cross his face. I wasn't. Thinking clearly. No, you weren't, I agreed softly. And now there are consequences that can't be undone. Those vines were older than you, Daniel. They can't be replaced. He swallowed hard, the reality of what he'd done seeming to sink. And are you going to press charges? I straightened up, looking out at the vineyard that stretched beyond the damaged section, the land that remained vibrant and alive despite this wound. Yes, I said finally, the decision settling in my chest with a heavy certainty. Not out of anger or vengeance, but because actions must have consequences. You made your choice, Daniel. Now you need to face it. His expression hardened again, the brief vulnerability disappearing. Then we're done. Don't visit me. Don't call. As far as I'm concerned, I no longer have a mother. The words were meant to wound, and they did. But beneath the pain was a strange sense of clarity. This break had been coming for a long time, perhaps since Daniel first began to see the vineyard as something to possess rather than something to cherish. I'll always be your mother, Daniel. That doesn't change, even now. When you're ready to talk, really talk, not threaten or manipulate, I'll be here. I stepped back, nodding to Officer Reyes that I was finished. Thomas joined me as the police cruiser pulled away, Daniel's rigid profile visible through the window. Are you okay? He asked quietly. No, I admitted. But I will be. Together, we walked toward the damaged section of the vineyard. Javier and several workers were already there, carefully examining the uprooted vines, assessing which might be salvageable. Some of these might survive if we replant them immediately, Javier said as we approached. Their root systems are damaged but intact. The older ones, though. He shook his head sadly. I knelt beside one of the broken vines, running my fingers along its gnarled trunk. This plant had been producing grapes since before Daniel was born, its roots reaching deep into soil that held the history of our family's dreams. Let's save what we can, I said, standing up and brushing the dirt from my knees. And for those we can't, we'll take cuttings. We might be able to propagate new vines from the original stock. Javier nodded appreciatively. Good thinking. The DNA will be preserved at least. For the next several hours, I worked alongside the vineyard crew, my suit jacket and heels discarded, my hands in the soil where they belonged. We carefully excavated the salvageable vines, trimmed damaged roots, and replanted them with plenty of water and root stimulator. For the destroyed plants, we took multiple cuttings, preparing them for rooting in the greenhouse. Thomas worked, tirelessly beside me, following instructions from the more experienced hands, his professor's clothes now as dirt-stained as mine. Neither of us mentioned Daniel or the events that had led to this moment. There would be time for that later. Now was for healing, for salvaging, for beginning again. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the vineyard, we finally stepped back to survey our work. The damaged section looked bare compared to the lush surrounding rows, but it wasn't destroyed. New vines would grow here, descendants of the originals, carrying forward the genetic memory of what had been planted decades ago. It's going to be okay, isn't it? Thomas asked, echoing his question from the day before, but with new meaning now. I looked out over the vineyard, seeing beyond the present damage to the harvests yet to come, the wines yet to be made, the future yet to unfold. In a strange way, Daniel's destructive act had only reinforced my commitment to protecting what mattered. Yes, I said, absolute certainty in my voice. It's going to be more than okay. That evening, as twilight settled over Lake Evergreen, I sat on my porch with Thomas and Javier, sharing a bottle of our reserve Cabernet, wine made from the very vines that had been damaged that day. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. To resilience, Javier proposed, raising his glass. To new beginnings, Thomas added. I lifted my glass, the deep ruby liquid catching the last light of day. To legacy, not just what we inherit, but what we choose to build. We drank in companionable silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The day had brought pain and loss, but also clarity and resolution. Daniel had made his choice, and now he would live with the consequences. Sophia stood at a crossroads, still deciding which path to take. And Thomas, quiet, thoughtful Thomas, had discovered a connection to the land and its purpose that none of us had anticipated. As for me, I had found strength I hadn't known I possessed, the courage to protect what mattered even when doing so meant standing against those I loved. The vineyard would continue. The scholarship trust would provide opportunities for generations to come. The community Michael and I had helped build would thrive. This wasn't the ending I had imagined for our family story. There was loss here, and grief for what might have been. But there was also hope, determination, and the quiet certainty that I had done what was right, not just for myself, but for the legacy we had created together. The stars began to appear above the lake, eternal and unchanging despite the tumult of human lives below. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The harvest was coming. There would be legal proceedings involving Daniel, decisions to make about the vineyard's future direction. But tonight, sitting with those who truly understood the value of what we were protecting, I felt something unexpected. Peace. Not the peace of conflicts resolved or problems solved. Those would take time and might never be completely finished. But the deeper peace that comes from living in alignment with your truest values, from standing firm in defense of what matters most. Michael had always said that great wine, like a great life, required both resilience and adaptability, the strength to withstand challenges and the flexibility to change with changing circumstances. Today had tested both qualities in me, in our family, in the vineyard itself. We had bent, but not broken. And from this difficult pruning, new growth would emerge. Different, perhaps, than what had been planned, but no less vital for that difference. I raised my glass once more to the darkening sky, to the memory of the man who had started this journey with me, to the future we had dreamed of that was now taking an unexpected form. To what endures, I said softly, and to what transforms. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.